My ex-husband's jaw literally dropped when he saw me step off my own private jet at the charity gala. The champagne flute slipped from his manicured fingers as his his wealthy benefactor wife, stared in disbelief at the sleek Gulfstream G650 gleaming behind me on the tarmac. That's yours?" Marcus stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. I adjusted my Hermès scarf and smiled sweetly. "Oh, this little thing? It's just my weekend jet. The bigger one is being serviced in Monaco." The look on Vivienne's botoxed face was absolutely priceless as she realized her boy toy's discarded wife now owned aircraft worth more than their entire portfolio combined. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." But let me take you back to where this incredible journey began, because the woman standing on that tarmac was nothing like the broken shell of a person I'd been just 3 years earlier. My name is Isabella Rodriguez, and I used to believe that love conquered all, even financial incompatibility. For 12 years, I'd been married to Marcus Chen, a charming but chronically unsuccessful entrepreneur who seemed to have a PhD in burning through money on failed ventures. While he chased one get-rich-quick scheme after another, I worked double shifts as a flight attendant for Premier Airways, my feet aching in designer shoes I couldn't afford, serving champagne to passengers living the life I could only dream about. Our modest apartment in Queens felt like a palace when we first moved in together, fresh out of college and drunk on possibility. Marcus had big dreams, importing exotic teas, launching a food truck empire, creating the next revolutionary app. I believed in every single one of them, emptying my savings account again and again to fund his sure thing investments that somehow always managed to fail spectacularly. "This time is different, Bella," he'd say, his dark eyes sparkling with that infectious enthusiasm that had made me fall for him in the first place. "The kombucha market is exploding. We'll be millionaires within 2 years." I'd nod and smile, transferring another chunk of my inheritance from my grandmother, money that was supposed to be our safety net, into his latest business account. Between flights to Dubai, London, and Tokyo, I'd study business management, courses online, dreaming of someday starting my own aviation consulting firm. I understood the luxury travel industry from the inside out, had memorized the preferences of high-net-worth individuals who thought nothing of spending $50,000 on a weekend trip. But every time I mentioned my own entrepreneurial aspirations, Marcus would wave them off with a patronizing smile. "Focus on one business at a time, babe," he'd say, not looking up from his laptop where he was designing yet another logo for yet another doomed venture. "Once the kombucha thing takes off, then we can talk about your little travel ideas." My little travel ideas. The dismissiveness in those 4 words should have been my first red flag. But love, or what I thought was love, has a way of making you ignore the obvious warning signs. The second red flag came during my layover in Beverly Hills, when I spotted Marcus having an intimate lunch with a woman who clearly wasn't hurting for money. Even from across the restaurant, I could see the Cartier watch glinting on her wrist, the perfectly styled silver hair that screamed expensive salon, the way she leaned forward with predatory interest as Marcus gestured animatedly about his latest business plan. Vivienne Blackwell, as I later discovered, was 62 years old and worth approximately $40 million. She'd inherited a chain of luxury hotels from her late husband and had a well-documented history of mentoring younger men with entrepreneurial aspirations. Marcus was apparently her latest project. I confronted him that evening when I returned from my 3-day rotation to Bangkok. He was in our bathroom, using cologne I'd never seen before, something expensive that definitely wasn't in our budget. "Who was the woman at Maestro's yesterday?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe with my arms crossed. His hand froze mid-spritz. "What woman?" the silver-haired woman who was hanging on your every word during what looked like a very cozy business lunch. Marcus set the cologne bottle down carefully, his reflection meeting my eyes in the mirror. That was Vivienne Blackwell. She's a potential investor in the kombucha line. Investor, I repeated flatly. Is that what we're calling it? He turned around, his expression shifting to that wounded puppy look he'd perfected over the years. Bella, you're being paranoid. This is exactly the kind of connection we've been praying for. She has the capital and the distribution network to make this business explode. The way he said, "we," made my stomach churn. When had I become a silent partner in his dreams while my own remained perpetually on hold? Over the next few weeks, Marcus became increasingly secretive. He'd take phone calls in the other room, typing furiously on his laptop late into the night, and his wardrobe suddenly upgraded to designer brands that cost more than my monthly salary. When I questioned the new Tom Ford shirts and Gucci loafers appearing in our closet, he claimed they were investor meetings necessities. Image is everything in business, Bella. Vivienne explained that successful people need to look the part. Vivienne explained. Everything was suddenly about what Vivienne thought, what Vivienne suggested, what Vivienne believed would work best for the business. She was paying for a new logo design, a professional marketing campaign, and apparently Marcus's entire new wardrobe. In return, he was spending increasingly long hours at her Malibu estate, ostensibly working on business strategy. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The final straw came on a rainy Tuesday when I returned early from a canceled flight to find Marcus, packing a suitcase with clothes I'd never seen before. Italian leather shoes, silk ties, a watch that probably cost more than our yearly rent. "Where are you going?" I asked, my heart already knowing the answer. He didn't look up from his careful packing. "Vivienne's taking me to Napa for a wine industry conference. She thinks there might be opportunities to position the kombucha brand in the luxury beverage market." "For how long?" "Just a week." He finally met my eyes, and I saw something there I'd never seen before. Shame mixed with defiance. This could change everything for us, Bella. But there was no us in his voice anymore. There was only him and the wealthy woman who could give him everything I couldn't: immediate access to capital, luxury lifestyle, and the kind of business connections that took decades to build organically. I should have fought harder. I should have demanded the truth about what was really happening during those long strategy sessions at Vivienne's estate. Instead, I found myself paralyzed by a terrible combination of denial and self-doubt. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe this really was just business. Maybe successful partnerships required sacrifices I wasn't sophisticated enough to understand. Marcus returned from Napa with a deep tan, stories about wine tastings with industry moguls, and a business proposal that would require him to relocate temporarily to Los Angeles to work more closely with Vivienne's distribution network. "It's only for 6 months," he assured me, his hands cupping my face with practiced tenderness. "Once we get the kombucha line established on the West Coast, I'll come back and we can finally start planning that life we've always dreamed about." But his kiss felt different, distant, perfunctory, like he was already halfway out the door. 2 weeks later, I was reorganizing our closet when I found the receipt that changed everything. It had fallen out of one of his jacket pockets, a slip of paper from Cartier in Beverly Hills. A women's diamond tennis bracelet, purchased the same day he'd supposedly been in meetings with potential distributors. The price tag made my knees buckle. $28,000. $28,000. More than I made in 6 months of serving champagne at 30,000 feet. My hands were shaking as I called the number on the receipt, claiming to be Marcus's assistant, calling about a return policy question. The sales associate was happy to help, explaining that Mr. Chen had been such a pleasure to work with, especially when he'd explained that the bracelet was a gift for his girlfriend, who was helping launch his new business venture. Girlfriend. Not wife, not business partner, girlfriend. I hung up and sat on our bed, the bed where he'd made love to me just 3 nights earlier while planning his escape, and felt something inside me break in a way I'd never experienced before. Not just heartbreak, but a fundamental shattering of my understanding of who I was and what my life meant. That evening, when Marcus called from his business dinner in Los Angeles, I asked him directly, "Are you having an affair with Vivienne? Blackwell?" The pause that followed told me everything I needed to know. "Bella," he said finally, his voice heavy with something that might have been regret, but felt more like relief. "We need to talk when I get back." But he never came back. Not really. He returned to collect his belongings and deliver the speech he'd probably been rehearsing for weeks. How he'd never meant for this to happen. How Vivienne understood his ambitions in ways I never could. How their connection was both personal and professional in ways that created opportunities he couldn't walk away from. "She's not just an investor, Bella. She's a partner in every sense of the word. She gets the business world in ways that I don't," I finished for him, my voice surprisingly steady. "Because I'm just a flight attendant who serves drinks and pretends to smile while rich people treat me like furniture." His wince confirmed another painful truth. He'd always been slightly embarrassed by my job, even though my salary had funded every single one of his failed ventures. "It's not about that," he said, but his eyes said otherwise. "Vivienne and we're building something together, something bigger than kombucha, bigger than any single business. She has connections in industries you wouldn't even think about. Her ex-husband's business partner sits on the board of 3 Fortune 500 companies. Her neighbor owns a chain of luxury resorts. This isn't just about money. It's about access to a world that could set us up for life." "Us?" I asked quietly. Another wince. "Me. Set me up for life." The divorce papers arrived by courier 2 days later, along with a settlement offer that was insulting in its calculated precision. Because Marcus had never technically earned significant income during our marriage, and because most of our shared assets were actually my assets that I'd foolishly put in both our names, the division was remarkably simple. He'd take half of everything I'd worked for, plus the business assets I'd funded, while leaving me with the debt from his failed ventures and a lease on an apartment I couldn't afford alone. His lawyer, apparently paid for by Vivienne, explained that Marcus was being generous by not requesting spousal support, given that his new business ventures were still in development phases. Generous. The man who'd spent 12 years spending my money on his dreams was being generous by not asking for more. I signed the papers in a conference room that smelled like expensive leather and broken dreams, my hand cramping as I wrote my name over and over again, officially releasing my claim to a man who'd never really been mine to begin with. 3 weeks later, I was living in a studio apartment in Astoria, surrounded by moving boxes and wondering how I'd managed to lose everything while barely noticing it was happening. My savings account, once robust enough to buy a small house, now contained just enough to cover rent for 2 months if I lived on ramen noodles and tap water. My phone buzzed with a text from my former life. A photo Marcus had posted on social media showing him and Vivienne at some charity gala in Beverly Hills. She was wearing the $28,000 bracelet, her manicured hand resting possessively on his arm as they posed next to a display about supporting young entrepreneurs. The caption read, "Grateful for mentors who believe in turning vision into reality." I stared at that photo for longer than was healthy, studying every detail of their coordinated outfits, their confident smiles, the backdrop of wealth and success that he'd traded our marriage to access. They looked like they belonged together, the sophisticated older woman and her handsome protégé, playing power couple at charity events I couldn't afford to attend even if I'd been invited. That night, lying on an air mattress in my empty studio, I allowed myself one final evening of grief for the life I'd thought we were building together. I cried for the dreams we'd shared, for the future we'd planned, for the woman I'd been who'd believed that love and loyalty were enough to sustain a partnership. But somewhere in those tears, something else began to emerge. Not just sadness, but anger. Not just anger, but determination. And not just determination, but a crystal-clear vision of exactly what I was going to do next. Marcus had left me for a woman who could write checks to fund his ambitions. Vivienne had won him with her connections, her established wealth, her ability to open doors he could never reach on his own merit. Fine. If money and connections were the only currencies that mattered in his world, then I'd become fluent in both languages. But unlike Vivienne, who'd inherited her fortune, and unlike Marcus, who'd married into his, I was going to earn every single dollar of mine. And when I was done building my empire, his face when he realized what he'd walked away from would be absolutely priceless. The woman crying on that air mattress had no idea she was about to become the CEO of the fastest-growing luxury aviation company on the West Coast, with a personal net worth that would make Vivienne's $40 million look like pocket change. But that transformation was going to require everything I had. Every connection I'd made serving champagne at 30,000 feet. Every business lesson I'd absorbed through osmosis. Every ounce of determination that had been lying dormant while I'd played the supportive wife role. Marcus thought he'd traded up when he chose Vivienne's established wealth over my potential. He was about to learn the difference between inheriting success and creating it from nothing, and I couldn't wait to teach him that lesson in the most spectacular way possible. The morning after my final breakdown on that air mattress, I woke, up before dawn, with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. While Marcus was probably enjoying breakfast in bed at Vivienne's Malibu mansion, I was sitting cross-legged on my studio apartment floor, surrounded by notebooks and my laptop, mapping out the most audacious business plan of my life. I had advantages Marcus would never understand, because he'd never bothered to really listen to my stories from work. During my 8 years as a senior flight attendant on Premier Airways luxury routes, I hadn't just been serving champagne. I'd been conducting an intensive masterclass in the ultra-wealthy's travel preferences, pain points, and spending habits. Mrs. Pemberton from the pharmaceutical dynasty always complained about commercial flights, even first-class ones, because she couldn't bring her 3 therapy dogs on board. The Yamamoto family, who owned a chain of high-end sushi restaurants, frequently mentioned how difficult it was to find aviation services that understood their specific dietary requirements during long international flights. Tech billionaire David Sterling had once spent an entire flight to Dubai explaining to his assistant how he'd gladly pay double for a charter service that could guarantee absolute privacy and custom-configured workspaces. These weren't just casual complaints. They were market research gold that I'd been absorbing without realizing it. Every frustration they'd shared was a business opportunity waiting to be seized by someone who understood their world intimately enough to solve problems they didn't even know they had. My first call was to Elena Vasquez, a fellow flight attendant who'd become my closest friend during those grueling international rotations. Unlike me, Elena had never let a man derail her ambitions. She'd saved aggressively for 5 years and had recently quit Premier Airways to start her own luxury travel planning service for high-net-worth individuals. "Isabella, thank God you're calling," Elena said when she picked up on the second ring. "I've been worried sick since I heard about the divorce. Are you okay?" "Better than okay," I replied, surprising myself with how true that felt. "I'm calling because I have a proposition that could change both our lives." I spent the next hour outlining my vision. A boutique aviation service that went beyond just private jet charters to offer completely customized luxury travel experiences. Not just transportation from point A to point B, but curated journeys that anticipated every need, preference, and desire of clients who could afford anything but struggled to find service providers who truly understood their lifestyle. Think about it, Elena. We've both spent years studying these people up close. We know Mrs. Chen's daughter is allergic to shellfish and needs EpiPens on every flight. We know that real estate mogul Harrison Ford, not the actor, requires his jet temperature. Exactly 72 degrees because his multiple sclerosis makes him sensitive to heat. We know the Hartwell family always travels with their private chef because the patriarch has severe diabetes and specific dietary requirements. Elena was silent for a long moment, and I could practically hear her mind racing through the possibilities. You're talking about serious capital requirements, Isabella. Custom aircraft configurations, insurance, certifications, staffing. We'd need at least $2 million just to get started properly. I know, I said, staring at the business plan I'd been sketching since 4 a.m., which is why I'm not thinking small. I'm thinking about attracting investors who understand that this market will pay premium prices for genuine expertise and flawless execution. Over the next 2 weeks, I transformed my studio apartment into mission control for the most intensive research project of my life. I analyzed every luxury aviation company on the West Coast, identifying gaps in their service offerings and weaknesses in their market positioning. I studied FAA regulations until I could recite them in my sleep. I researched aircraft leasing, options, insurance requirements, and staffing protocols. Most importantly, I began reaching out to former passengers who'd expressed frustration with existing charter services, not to pitch them anything, yet, but to conduct informal market research about their ideal travel experience. The responses were even more encouraging than I'd hoped. Within a week, I had detailed feedback from 12 ultra-high net worth individuals, all of whom expressed enthusiasm about the concept of a service that combined luxury aviation with concierge-level attention to personal preferences. The problem with most charter companies, explained Patricia Montrose, heiress to a shipping fortune, is that they treat every client the same. They don't understand that my Alzheimer's-affected mother needs specific routing to avoid turbulence, or that my son's autism means he requires advance notice of any schedule changes. We're not just buying transportation, we're buying peace of mind. Her words crystallized exactly what I'd been trying to articulate. This wasn't about competing with existing charter services on price, or even luxury. It was about creating an entirely new category of ultra-personalized aviation service. My breakthrough came during a conversation with Dr. Sarah Chen, a renowned cardiac surgeon who'd been one of my regular passengers on the Dubai route. When I mentioned my business concept during a carefully casual coffee meeting, her eyes lit up with recognition. Isabella, this is exactly what the medical conference circuit needs. Do you have any idea how many prominent surgeons waste time dealing with incompetent charter services that don't understand our scheduling constraints? I've missed connecting flights because charter companies didn't account for surgical delays. I've arrived at conferences exhausted because the aircraft wasn't configured for the kind of rest I need between procedures. She leaned forward, her voice taking on the intensity I'd seen when she discussed complex surgical cases. If you could create a service that specializes in medical professional travel, understanding our schedules, our stress levels, our need for specific aircraft configurations that allow us to decompress or prepare for procedures, you'd have a monopoly on a market segment worth hundreds of millions annually. That conversation led to another, then another, as Dr. Chen introduced me to colleagues who'd been searching for exactly the kind of service I was envisioning. Within 3 weeks, I had preliminary commitments from 15 medical professionals willing to pay premium rates for specialized aviation services tailored to their unique requirements. But I still needed capital, and traditional investors weren't going to take a chance on a recently divorced flight attendant with no business track record, regardless of how solid my market research was. That's when I remembered Jonathan Price. Jonathan was a venture capitalist I'd served dozens of times on flights between Los Angeles and Tokyo. Unlike most passengers, he'd always been genuinely curious about my perspective on the luxury travel industry, asking detailed questions about service standards, customer satisfaction issues, and operational challenges. During one particularly long delay in Narita Airport, he'd spent 2 hours picking my brain about what he called insider intelligence on the aviation industry. You see things most consultants miss, he'd told me. You're in the unique position of observing ultra-wealthy behavior patterns without the filter of trying to sell them something. That's invaluable market research that money can't buy. I'd laughed it off at the time, but now his words took on new significance. Maybe my years of service hadn't been time wasted. Maybe they'd been the most expensive market research education available. Reaching out to Jonathan required every ounce of courage I possessed. He remembered me immediately, but I could hear the surprise in his voice when I explained I was no longer with Premier Airways and wanted to discuss a business opportunity. Isabella Rodriguez, he said thoughtfully, the flight attendant who always knew exactly which passengers needed extra attention for medical conditions. You once prevented what could have been a serious diabetic emergency during that flight to Hong Kong. I was amazed he remembered such a specific detail, but it gave me confidence to outline my business plan with the same attention to detail I'd once applied to ensuring passenger safety and comfort. Jonathan listened without interruption as I explained the concept, the market research, the preliminary client commitments, and the competitive advantages that came from my years of insider knowledge. When I finished, he was quiet for so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Isabella, he said finally, what you're describing isn't just a charter service. It's a luxury lifestyle management company that happens to specialize in aviation. You're talking about creating relationships, not just transactions. Exactly, I replied, my heart racing with excitement that he understood the vision. I'm going to be direct with you. Most people who pitch me aviation businesses are pilots, or aircraft enthusiasts who love planes but don't understand service. You're approaching this from the opposite direction. You understand service at the highest level, and you're building around that expertise. That's much rarer and potentially much more valuable. He paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. I want to see a detailed business plan, financial projections, and a demonstration of your operational concept. If you can prove this model works on a small scale, I'm prepared to discuss significant funding for expansion. Significant funding. The words sent a thrill through me that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with validation that my vision wasn't just a divorced woman's revenge fantasy, it was a legitimate business opportunity. Over the next month, Elena and I worked 18-hour days developing what we called our proof of concept operation. Using Elena's savings and the last of my divorce settlement, we leased a small Citation CJ3 for a month and provided ultra-customized charter services to 5 of our preliminary clients. The results exceeded our most optimistic projections. Dr. Chen's experience became our template for medical professional services. We configured the aircraft with specialized lighting that allowed her to review surgical notes during flight, installed communication equipment that let her consult with colleagues at her destination hospital, and arranged for a massage therapist to meet the aircraft so she could decompress before her conference presentation. For the Pemberton family's trip to their daughter's wedding in Napa, we obtained special permits to transport their 3 therapy dogs, arranged for a certified animal behaviorist to ensure the pets remained calm during flight, and coordinated with the destination venue to have appropriate accommodations waiting upon arrival. Each flight was essentially a customized project that required coordination between multiple service providers, all managed by our team to ensure seamless execution. The clients weren't just satisfied, they were evangelistic about telling their networks about this new level of service. This isn't travel, Mrs. Pemberton told her sister during the return flight, not realizing I could hear her from the galley. This is having a personal assistant who happens to own airplanes. Isabella anticipated needs I didn't even know I had. When Jonathan reviewed our month-long operational results, his response was immediate. I want to fund this, not just the expansion phase. I want to fund the creation of something that could dominate the ultra-luxury aviation market. His initial investment offer was $3 million for a 25% stake in what we decided to call Celestial Aviation Services. The name suggested both the literal aspect of air travel and the elevated service experience we were creating. But Jonathan's true value wasn't just his money, it was his network. Within 2 weeks of our partnership agreement, he'd introduced me to aircraft leasing specialists, FAA regulatory experts, and high-net-worth individuals from his investment portfolio who were immediately interested in our services. More importantly, he helped me understand that I wasn't just building a charter service. I was creating a luxury brand that could eventually expand into related services like yacht charters, private resort management, and ultra-high-end event planning. "You're not competing with other aviation companies," he explained during one of our strategy sessions. "You're competing with anything else ultra-wealthy people might spend money on for exceptional experiences. Your real competition is custom yacht charters, private island rentals, and exclusive resort bookings. The aviation component is just your entry point into the luxury lifestyle management market." That perspective transformed everything about how I approached the business. Instead of thinking like a service provider trying to satisfy customers, I began thinking like a luxury lifestyle curator building relationships with clients who could afford anything, but couldn't buy the kind of personalized attention we were offering. 6 months after my divorce was finalized, Celestial Aviation Services had 12 aircraft under management, 47 regular clients, and a waiting list of potential customers willing to pay premium rates for our signature service level. I'd moved from my studio apartment in Astoria to a 2-bedroom condo in Manhattan Beach, close enough to our LAX operations center to oversee daily operations, but luxurious enough to host client meetings in my own space when needed. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. The woman who'd spent 12 years deferring her dreams to fund Marcus's failures had discovered that her years of service industry experience had actually been the perfect foundation for building something extraordinary. Every detail I'd mastered as a flight attendant, anticipating needs, managing complex logistics, maintaining grace under pressure, building trust with demanding personalities, had prepared me to create a business that delivered experiences money couldn't buy anywhere else. Elena had become our chief operations officer, managing our growing team of pilots, flight attendants, and ground services coordinators. Jonathan had introduced us to 2 additional investors, both of whom brought not just capital but connections to potential clients in markets we hadn't even considered. But the most satisfying transformation was internal. For the first time in my adult life, I was building something that reflected my own vision, my own values, and my own understanding of what excellence looked like. Every client success, every smooth operation, every positive review was validation that I'd found my true calling. Marcus's Instagram posts still occasionally appeared in my social media feeds. Photos of him and Vivienne at charity galas, restaurant openings, and luxury resort vacations. But instead of triggering the painful jealousy I'd expected, these images now seemed like glimpses into a life that had never actually been mine to begin with. He'd traded our marriage for access to established wealth and social connections. I'd used our divorce as motivation to build my own empire from scratch, creating value instead of just attaching myself to it. The difference between inheriting access and earning it was becoming clearer every day. Vivienne's wealth came with limitations, expectations from her late husband's family, obligations to maintain certain social appearances, dependency on existing business relationships that could shift or disappear if her benefactors lost interest. My wealth was growing organically, built on genuine expertise and authentic relationships with clients who chose Celestial Aviation Services because we delivered results they couldn't find anywhere else. Each success created momentum for the next opportunity. Each satisfied client became a referral source for additional business. As I prepared for our first anniversary celebration, a private event for clients and investors at a luxury hangar we'd leased at Van Nuys Airport, I realized that Marcus had actually done me the biggest favor of my life by leaving. If he'd stayed, I'd probably still be working for Premier Airways, funding his next failed venture while dreaming about someday starting my own business. His betrayal had forced me to discover capabilities I'd never known I possessed, to take risks I'd never imagined I could handle, to build something that exceeded even my most ambitious fantasies. The woman serving champagne at 30,000 feet had been observing a world she thought she could never belong to. The woman planning to acquire her third aircraft and expand into European markets had realized she didn't just belong in that world. She was creating a better version of it. And the best part was, Marcus had no idea any of this was happening. As far as he knew, I was still struggling to rebuild my life after our divorce, probably working another service industry job, while nursing wounds from his abandonment. The surprise I was planning for our eventual reunion was going to be worth every 18-hour day, every difficult client conversation, every moment of uncertainty I'd faced while building Celestial Aviation Services into something extraordinary. His face when he discovered what he'd walked away from was going to be absolutely priceless. 18 months after founding Celestial Aviation Services, I found myself standing in the executive boardroom of Blackwell Luxury Hotels, staring across a mahogany conference table at the woman who had stolen my husband. Vivienne Blackwell looked exactly as I remembered from those paparazzi photos. Perfectly coiffed silver hair, designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and that predatory smile that had once made my stomach churn with jealousy. Now, it just made me smile back. "Ms. Rodriguez," she said, extending a manicured hand across the table. "I understand you're the CEO of the aviation company that's been making quite a splash in luxury travel circles." "That's correct," I replied smoothly, accepting her handshake, with the confidence of someone who'd spent the last year and a half building relationships with people who made Vivienne's $40 million look modest. "Thank you for considering Celestial Aviation Services for your hotel's VIP transportation needs." The irony was delicious. Vivienne had no idea she was sitting across from the ex-wife of her boy toy, and I had no intention of enlightening her, yet. This meeting was purely business, the result of 3 months of careful networking that had led to Blackwell Hotels requesting a proposal for exclusive aviation services for their most elite guests. "Your reputation precedes you," Vivienne continued, consulting the folder in front of her. "I understand you've cornered the market on ultra-personalized aviation services. The medical professional segment alone has been quite impressive to watch from afar." What she didn't know was that our medical professional division had grown into something much larger. Dr. Sarah Chen's initial enthusiasm had led to partnerships with major medical conferences, pharmaceutical companies conducting research trials, and emergency medical transport for high-profile patients who required absolute discretion. Just last month, we'd coordinated the transport of a Supreme Court justice's wife for experimental cancer treatment in Switzerland, managing not just the flight logistics but also medical equipment transport, specialist physician coordination, and complete media privacy. The justice had personally written a letter of recommendation that opened doors to government contracts I'd never imagined possible. "The medical division has been successful," I acknowledged. "But it's really just one example of what happens when you truly understand your client's unique requirements rather than offering cookie-cutter solutions." Vivienne nodded approvingly. "Which brings me to why we're here. Blackwell Hotels has been searching for an aviation partner who can deliver the same level of personalized service our guests expect from our properties. Our clientele includes heads of state, entertainment industry executives, and international business leaders who require absolute discretion and flawless execution." She slid a document across the table. "This is our initial proposal for an exclusive partnership. Celestial Aviation would become the preferred provider for all Blackwell Hotels' guest transportation needs across our 15 properties." I reviewed the numbers, maintaining my poker face despite the excitement building. In my chest, the contract would guarantee minimum annual revenue of $12 million, with performance bonuses that could push it to nearly $20 million. More importantly, it would position Celestial Aviation Services as the aviation partner for one, of the world's most prestigious luxury hotel chains. The numbers are impressive, I said carefully. But I'm curious about the exclusivity requirements. Would this partnership prevent us from working with competing hotel chains? Not competing chains, Vivienne clarified. But we would expect Celestial Aviation to prioritize Blackwell guests and maintain certain confidentiality standards about our client base. What she was really asking for was insider information about who was traveling where and when. Intelligence that could be valuable for business development, social positioning, or simple gossip. It was exactly the kind of ethical compromise that separated legitimate luxury service providers from those who traded access for influence. I appreciate the opportunity, I replied, closing the folder. But I should clarify something about how Celestial Aviation operates. Our client relationships are built on absolute confidentiality and trust. We don't share travel information, guest preferences, or scheduling details with anyone, including business partners. Vivienne's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, I wouldn't expect you to violate client confidentiality. I was simply suggesting that synergies between our services could benefit everyone involved. The conversation continued for another hour, covering operational details, service standards, and implementation timelines. Throughout, I found myself studying Vivienne with the detached curiosity of someone observing a formerly threatening predator from a position of safety. She was still beautiful, still commanding, still radiating the kind of established wealth that Marcus had found so irresistible. But there was something brittle beneath the surface, a carefully maintained facade that suggested the confidence wasn't quite as unshakable as it appeared. As our meeting concluded, Vivienne's assistant knocked on the door. Mrs. Blackwell, your lunch appointment has arrived. Through the glass conference room walls, I could see Marcus in the reception area, checking his phone while he waited. He'd gained weight since our divorce, his designer suit doing its best to camouflage a softness around his midsection that suggested too many expensive dinners and not enough actual work. His hair was styled differently, slicked back in a way that probably looked sophisticated in certain lighting, but struck me as trying too hard. My business partner, Vivienne explained, following my gaze. He's been instrumental in developing our hospitality industry connections. Business partner, not husband, not boyfriend, not even romantic companion, just business partner. The demotion was subtle, but telling. I should let you get to your lunch, I said, gathering my materials. I'll have our team prepare a detailed response to your proposal within the week. As I walked toward the reception area, Marcus looked up from his phone. For a split second, our eyes met, and I watched recognition dawn on his face like sunrise over a landscape he'd forgotten existed. Bella? The nickname he'd called me, for 12 years, sounded foreign in his mouth now, uncertain and tentative. Hello, Marcus, I replied calmly, extending my hand for a professional handshake. It's Isabella now, actually. Isabella Rodriguez, CEO of Celestial Aviation Services. His handshake was limp, distracted, his eyes darting between my face and the Celestial Aviation portfolio in my other hand. This is your company? One of them, I replied with perfect honesty. In addition to the aviation business, I'd recently acquired a luxury concierge service and was in negotiations to purchase a boutique travel planning firm specializing in ultra-high net worth clients. Vivienne appeared beside us, her expression carefully neutral as she observed our exchange. I take it you two are acquainted? We have some history, I said smoothly, but that won't interfere with business considerations, of course. Marcus's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Whatever he'd imagined about my post-divorce life, clearly it hadn't included standing in his current girlfriend's office building as the CEO of a company being courted for multi-million-dollar contracts. Well, Vivienne said after an awkward pause, I'm sure you have other appointments, Ms. Rodriguez. Thank you for an illuminating discussion. As I walked toward the elevator, I could hear them beginning what sounded like an urgent whispered conversation behind me. I didn't turn around, but I could imagine Marcus's frantic questions and Vivienne's carefully modulated responses as she processed this unexpected complication to their lunch plans. The elevator doors closed on their confused faces, and I allowed myself a small smile of satisfaction. Not because I'd caused them discomfort, though that was admittedly gratifying, but because I'd handled the encounter with the kind of professional grace that would have been impossible during those early, desperate months after the divorce. That afternoon, I called an emergency strategy session with Elena and Jonathan to discuss the Blackwell opportunity. We met at our new offices in Century City, a sleek space that commanded stunning views of downtown Los Angeles and had been designed specifically to impress the kind of clients who expected their service providers to match their own standards of excellence. "The contract terms are excellent," Jonathan said, reviewing the proposal details. "But I'm concerned about the personal complications. Dating your ex-husband's current girlfriend creates potential conflicts that could damage our reputation if handled poorly." "Actually," I said, settling into my chair with the confidence of someone who'd spent months preparing for exactly this scenario, "I think it creates opportunities that could cement our position as the premier luxury aviation service on the West Coast." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "Vivienne Blackwell represents old money, established connections, and traditional luxury service models. She's exactly the kind of client who expects to leverage personal relationships for business. Advantages: working with her will demonstrate that Celestial Aviation operates on a higher level, that we can maintain absolute professionalism regardless of personal history." I pulled up our client portfolio on the conference room screen. "Look at who we're already serving: Supreme Court families, pharmaceutical executives, international diplomats, entertainment industry leaders. These people choose us precisely because we don't get involved in personal drama or social politics. Successfully managing the Blackwell relationship will prove that to every potential client who might be concerned about confidentiality." Jonathan nodded slowly. "You're positioning this as a demonstration of our ethical standards rather than a complication." "Exactly. And there's another advantage we haven't discussed." I switched to a different slide showing our competitive analysis. Blackwell Hotels has been struggling to differentiate themselves from other luxury chains. Their occupancy rates are down 8% year over year, and they're losing market share to boutique properties that offer more personalized service. Elena leaned forward with interest. "You think their aviation partnership is part of a larger repositioning strategy?" "I think they're desperate to find service innovations that will set them apart from competitors, which means they need us more than we need them, regardless of the contract size." Over the next week, our team prepared what I considered the most strategically sophisticated proposal in Celestial Aviation's history. Instead of simply responding to Blackwell's requirements, we outlined a partnership that would transform their guest experience through integration of ultra-personalized travel services. Our proposal included exclusive aircraft configurations designed specifically for different types of Blackwell guests: business jets optimized for executive productivity, family aircraft configured for comfort and entertainment, and specialty medical transport capabilities for guests requiring health-related accommodations. More importantly, we proposed a guest preference tracking system that would allow Blackwell properties to offer seamless travel coordination as part of their hospitality package. A guest checking out of the Blackwell Beverly Hills could have their preferred aircraft configuration, catering, and ground transportation automatically arranged for their next destination, creating a level of service integration that no competitor could match. The proposal positioned Celestial Aviation not as a vendor providing transportation services, but as a strategic partner enabling Blackwell Hotels to offer something truly unique in the luxury hospitality market. When I delivered the proposal, personally to Vivienne's office the following week, her reaction exceeded my expectations. "This is extraordinary," she said, reviewing the detailed service integration plans. You're essentially proposing to help us create a new category of luxury hospitality. That's exactly what I'm proposing, I confirmed. The ultra-wealthy don't just want luxury amenities. They want seamless experiences that anticipate their needs before they have to articulate them. This partnership would allow Blackwell Hotels to offer something that literally cannot be replicated by competitors. Vivienne set the proposal aside and studied me with undisguised curiosity. I have to ask, and please forgive the personal nature of the question, but does Marcus know about your success? The question was loaded with multiple layers of meaning. Was she asking out of genuine curiosity, protective concern for her boyfriend, or strategic interest in potential complications? Marcus and I have had no contact since our divorce was finalized, I replied truthfully. My business activities haven't been a topic of discussion between us. I see. She paused, clearly debating whether to continue down this path. He's mentioned you occasionally, always in the context of hoping you were managing well after the divorce. The careful phrasing suggested Marcus had been less than completely honest about the circumstances of our separation. Probably hadn't mentioned the years of financial support he'd received, the sacrifices I'd made to fund his failures, or the casual dismissiveness with which he'd treated my own professional aspirations. That's thoughtful of him, I said diplomatically. I hope he's found the success he was looking for. Something in my tone must have conveyed more than my words, because Vivienne's expression shifted subtly. For just a moment, the polished facade slipped, revealing something that looked almost like uncertainty. The proposal is impressive, she said, returning to safer ground. I'll need to present it to our board, but I anticipate very positive reception. The innovation in service integration alone would justify the partnership. As I prepared to leave, she made one final comment that stayed with me long after I'd returned to my office. I've been in the luxury service industry for over 20 years, she said. I've seen a lot of companies promise personalized attention, but very few that actually understand what that means at the highest levels. What you've built with Celestial Aviation is genuinely impressive. The compliment was professional, but underneath it I detected something else. A recognition that I represented something she hadn't expected to encounter in Marcus's past. Not the struggling ex-wife she'd probably imagined, but a legitimate peer who'd built something substantial through talent and determination rather than inheritance or strategic relationships. 3 days later, Blackwell Hotels officially accepted our partnership proposal. The announcement made industry news, positioning Celestial Aviation as the first aviation company to achieve full integration with a major luxury hotel chain. More satisfying than the contract value or industry recognition was the phone call I received that evening from Marcus. His number appeared on my phone for the first time since our divorce, and I let it ring 4 times before answering. Isabella, he said, his voice carefully modulated. I wanted to congratulate you on the Blackwell partnership. It's quite an achievement. Thank you, I replied neutrally. I appreciate the acknowledgement. A pause followed, heavy with everything he wasn't saying. Finally, I had no idea you were building something like this. The scope of what you've accomplished, it's remarkable. I've been fortunate to find the right opportunities, I said, not bothering to mention that those opportunities had come through years of careful relationship building, strategic planning, and 18-hour workdays he'd never had the discipline to sustain. Vivienne speaks very highly of your professionalism, he continued. She's looking forward to the partnership. The conversation felt surreal, my ex-husband calling to discuss business relationships with his current girlfriend, both of them apparently still unaware of the full extent of my transformation from abandoned wife to industry leader. I'm glad she's satisfied with our proposal, I said. Celestial Aviation takes all our partnerships seriously. After ending the call, I stood at my office window watching private jets take off from LAX in the distance. Each aircraft represented someone's journey, someone's story, someone's pursuit of something they valued enough to pay premium prices for exceptional service. 2 years earlier, I'd been watching those same planes from the cabin of a commercial airliner, serving champagne to passengers who seemed to inhabit a different universe from my own struggling marriage and deferred dreams. Now I owned 3 of those aircraft and had operational partnerships that gave me access to dozens more. The passengers who'd once been distant figures representing unattainable wealth were now clients who sought my expertise, valued my judgment, and paid premium rates for the services my company provided. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy. Every client relationship had required proving myself. Every operational challenge had demanded creative solutions. Every expansion opportunity had involved calculated risks that could have destroyed everything I'd built. But the woman who'd cried herself to sleep on an air mattress in a studio apartment had possessed capabilities she'd never been allowed to develop, while playing the supporting role in someone else's ambitions. The divorce had been devastating, but it had also been liberation. Freedom to discover what she could build when no one was limiting her vision or dismissing her potential. Marcus's call represented a milestone I hadn't realized I'd been working toward. Not his recognition of my success. I no longer needed external validation to confirm my worth, but his implicit acknowledgement that he'd made a fundamental miscalculation about what he was walking away from. He'd chosen Vivienne's established wealth over my potential, trading our shared history for immediate access to resources and connections. But potential, it turned out, was far more valuable than he'd understood. What I'd built from nothing was worth more than what she'd inherited, and what I was becoming would ultimately eclipse anything he could achieve through attachment to her existing empire. The best part was that this was still just the beginning. Celestial Aviation was profitable and growing, but it was also the foundation for something much larger, a luxury lifestyle management empire that could eventually encompass everything from aviation to yachts, from concierge services to exclusive event planning. The woman Marcus had left for a richer woman was about to become richer than both of them combined. And unlike Vivienne's inherited wealth or Marcus's dependency on her resources, everything I was building belonged entirely to me. His face when he realized the full scope of what he'd walked away from was going to be absolutely priceless. 2 years after signing the Blackwell partnership, Celestial Aviation Services had evolved into something I'd never imagined possible. During those dark days in my studio apartment, we weren't just an aviation company anymore. We were the premium lifestyle management empire I'd envisioned, with divisions spanning luxury aviation, yacht charters, private resort management, and exclusive event coordination. The transformation had been methodical and strategic. Each success created momentum for the next opportunity. Each satisfied client became a gateway to new markets we hadn't even known existed. What started as personalized aviation services had grown into comprehensive luxury lifestyle curation for individuals whose wealth gave them access to anything except the kind of seamless, anticipatory service we'd perfected. Our client roster read like a who's who of global influence. Pharmaceutical heiresses who needed medical transport coordination for experimental treatments, entertainment moguls requiring absolute discretion for family vacations, tech billionaires seeking sustainable luxury travel options that aligned with their environmental values, and foreign diplomats who valued our security protocols above traditional diplomatic channels. The financial numbers were staggering. Celestial Aviation Services was now valued at over $200 million, with annual revenue approaching $75 million. My personal net worth had crossed the 9-figure threshold, making me wealthier than Vivienne Blackwell and her entire extended family combined. But the most satisfying transformation wasn't financial, it was personal. The woman who'd once measured her worth through her husband's achievements now had Fortune 500 CEOs seeking her strategic advice, government officials requesting her company's specialized services, and industry publications featuring her as a visionary entrepreneur who'd created an entirely new category of luxury service. The invitation to speak at the Global Luxury Summit in Monaco had been the ultimate validation. As the keynote speaker for an audience of luxury industry leaders, I'd been asked to address innovation in ultra-high net worth client services, a topic I could discuss with authority earned through 5 years of building relationships with clients whose expectations exceeded anything traditional service providers could imagine. My speech had been scheduled for the same weekend as the Monaco yacht show, which meant many of our clients would be attending both events. It was the perfect opportunity to unveil Celestial's latest expansion, the acquisition of a custom-built super yacht that would serve as our floating headquarters for Mediterranean operations. The yacht, christened Celestial Horizon, was a masterpiece of engineering and design. At 280 feet, it featured accommodations for up to 20 guests, a helicopter landing pad, a fully equipped medical facility, and communication systems that allowed us to coordinate complex multi-location events from anywhere in the world. More importantly, it represented something unprecedented in the luxury service industry, a mobile platform that could deliver our signature personalized attention literally anywhere our clients wanted to go. Need a private medical consultation? While sailing between Greek islands? We could arrange for specialists to join you aboard. Want to host a business summit while traveling from Monaco to Portofino? We'd configure meeting spaces and coordinate secure communications for international participants. The yacht's maiden voyage was planned as an exclusive client appreciation event during the Monaco Summit weekend. 50 of our most valued clients had been invited for a 3-day experience that would showcase not just our expanded capabilities, but also our vision for the future of luxury lifestyle management. What none of them knew, what even Elena and Jonathan didn't know, was that I'd specifically timed this event to coincide with the Global Luxury Summit for one very personal reason. Marcus and Vivienne would both be attending the summit as representatives of Blackwell Hotels, which had been struggling financially despite our successful partnership. Industry rumors suggested they were actively seeking investors or acquisition, partners to shore up their declining market position. I'd been tracking their situation through industry publications and financial reports, watching with detached interest as the empire Vivienne had inherited slowly crumbled under competitive pressure and changing market dynamics. The luxury hospitality industry was evolving rapidly, and established players who couldn't adapt were being left behind by more agile competitors. Blackwell Hotels' problems weren't entirely their fault. The pandemic had devastated luxury travel, and recovery had been uneven across different market segments. But their response to these challenges had revealed fundamental weaknesses in leadership and strategic vision that no amount of inherited wealth could overcome. Marcus, meanwhile, had proven to be exactly what I'd always suspected: a fair-weather partner who excelled at spending other people's money, but lacked the resilience and creativity required to build anything sustainable. When Blackwell's financial difficulties began mounting, his contributions had become increasingly irrelevant. According to industry gossip, their relationship had deteriorated along with the business. Marcus's role had been quietly diminished, from business partner to something closer to kept man, a development that apparently hadn't sat well with his ego or their personal dynamic. The invitation I'd sent them for Celestial Horizon's maiden voyage had been carefully worded as a business networking opportunity. As our partners through the Blackwell relationship, they'd received an invitation to join other luxury industry leaders for what was described as an exclusive preview of our expanded Mediterranean operations. I doubted they'd attend. The optics of accepting hospitality from a company that was now significantly more successful than their own would be awkward for people who'd built their identity around financial superiority. But I'd sent the invitation anyway, partly as professional courtesy and partly as a subtle reminder of how dramatically our relative positions had shifted. The morning of the Monaco Summit keynote, I stood on the deck of Celestial Horizon as it was moored in Port Hercules, reviewing my speech notes while watching the sunrise paint the Mediterranean in shades of gold and pink. The yacht's crew was preparing for our guests' arrival later that evening, transforming already luxurious spaces into something that would exceed even their elevated expectations. Elena joined me on deck, carrying coffee and wearing the kind of smile that meant she had news. "The final RSVPs came in overnight," she said, handing me a steaming mug. 48 confirmed attendees, including some surprises. Good surprises or complicated surprises? Both, potentially. Catherine Montrose is flying in from Switzerland specifically for tonight. She's bringing her daughter and son-in-law, who apparently are considering commissioning their own yacht and want to see our operational model. Catherine Montrose was pharmaceutical royalty, heir to a family fortune built on groundbreaking medical research. Her presence would be valuable not just for the evening's networking, but also for potential expansion into luxury medical tourism, a market we'd been exploring for months. And the complicated surprise. Elena's smile turned mischievous. Marcus and Vivienne confirmed this morning. Their assistant called to arrange helicopter transport from the summit venue to the yacht. The news hit me with unexpected intensity. For months, I'd been preparing for this moment intellectually, but the emotional reality of Marcus and Vivienne, stepping aboard my yacht, surrounded by evidence of everything I'd built since he'd left me for her money, was almost overwhelming. "Are you okay?" Elena asked, studying my expression with concern. "Better than okay," I replied, and realized I meant it completely. "This is perfect timing, actually. Let them see exactly what they're missing." That afternoon, my keynote speech at the Global Luxury Summit exceeded my own expectations. Standing before an audience of industry leaders who'd watched celestial aviation's meteoric rise over the past 5 years, I spoke about the evolution from service provider to lifestyle curator, from meeting client needs to anticipating desires they hadn't yet recognized. The future of luxury isn't about offering more expensive versions of existing services, I told the assembled executives. It's about creating experiences that are literally impossible to obtain anywhere else. When a client calls Celestial Aviation, they're not hiring a charter service. They're accessing a network of capabilities that can make their most complex desires reality. I outlined case studies that demonstrated our approach. Coordinating a pharmaceutical heiress's experimental treatment in Switzerland, while simultaneously arranging for her family to vacation nearby. Managing a tech billionaire's carbon-neutral around-the-world expedition that raised millions for environmental causes, and facilitating a Supreme Court justice's wife's recovery from surgery aboard our medical yacht while maintaining absolute privacy from media attention. These aren't just logistics challenges, I explained. They're opportunities to create value that transcends transaction. Our clients don't just pay for services, they invest in relationships with people who understand their world intimately, enough to anticipate needs before they arise. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. During the question period, I fielded inquiries about expansion into new markets, potential partnerships with other luxury service providers, and strategies for maintaining service quality while scaling operations. But the most meaningful moment came during the networking reception following my speech, when Dr. Sarah Chen, the cardiac surgeon whose feedback had been instrumental in developing our medical professional services, approached with a group of colleagues. "Isabella," she said warmly, "I've been telling everyone about how you transformed my travel experience, but I don't think I ever properly thanked you for something more important." "What's that?" "You showed me what's possible when someone truly listens to their clients' needs instead of just trying to sell them something. Your approach to service has influenced how I interact with my own patients. The attention to detail, the anticipation of concerns, the seamless coordination, I've applied those principles to my surgical practice, and it's made me a better doctor." The compliment touched me more deeply than any financial milestone or industry recognition. This was the real value of what we'd built, not just successful business operations, but a model for human interaction that created genuine value for everyone involved. As the reception concluded, I returned to Celestial Horizon to oversee final preparations for the evening's client appreciation event. The yacht had been transformed into something that looked more like a floating palace than a working vessel. with discreet lighting that highlighted architectural details while maintaining the intimate atmosphere that encouraged meaningful conversation. Our guest list represented a cross-section of global influence: pharmaceutical executives, entertainment industry leaders, tech entrepreneurs, foreign diplomats, and financial moguls who collectively controlled resources that could reshape entire industries. More importantly, they were people who'd chosen Celestial Aviation Services because we'd earned their trust through consistent delivery of impossible-seeming results. The first guests arrived by helicopter just as the sun was setting over Monaco's harbor. Catherine Montrose's arrival set the tone for the evening. Her family's pharmaceutical empire had been built on innovation and excellence, values that aligned perfectly with what we'd created at Celestial. "Isabella," she said, embracing me warmly as she stepped onto the yacht's deck. "This is extraordinary. I've been on many super yachts, but never one that felt like a floating headquarters for changing the world." Her observation was more accurate than she realized. Over the past year, Celestial Horizon had become the venue for confidential discussions that shaped policy decisions, business strategies, and philanthropic initiatives affecting millions of people worldwide. When ultra-high-net-worth individuals wanted to have conversations away from public scrutiny, they increasingly chose our floating meeting spaces over traditional venues. As more guests arrived, the yacht's main salon filled with the kind of conversations that only happened when truly influential people felt comfortable speaking candidly. Business partnerships were forming, charitable initiatives were being planned, and strategic alliances were developing that would impact industries I'd never imagined touching when I'd started with a single charter aircraft. I was deep in conversation with a pharmaceutical executive about potential medical tourism opportunities when Elena appeared at my elbow. "Marcus and Vivienne just arrived," she said quietly. "They're on the aft deck with Jonathan, but they look uncomfortable." Through the salon's floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see them standing somewhat apart from other guests, their body language suggesting the kind of social uncertainty that came from being significantly outclassed by their surroundings. Marcus wore a tuxedo that was obviously expensive but somehow didn't quite fit the occasion, while Vivienne's cocktail dress, though elegant, looked conservative compared to the effortless sophistication displayed by other guests. "Should I go?" "Welcome them," Elena asked. "Let them settle in first," I replied. "They need time to absorb what they're seeing before we have any meaningful conversations." Over the next hour, I watched them from across the yacht's various gathering spaces as they slowly realized the caliber of people surrounding them. These weren't just wealthy individuals. They were global decision-makers whose choices affected entire industries and national policies. The Supreme Court Justice's husband was discussing constitutional law with a pharmaceutical heiress whose research was reshaping cancer treatment. A tech billionaire was planning environmental initiatives with foreign diplomats whose countries controlled critical natural resources. Marcus and Vivienne were clearly struggling to find their footing in conversations that required the kind of substantive expertise they'd never needed to develop. Their world had been built on social positioning and inherited advantages, but this environment rewarded actual achievement and innovative thinking. When I finally approached them on the yacht's upper deck, they were standing alone, watching other guests through the windows of the main salon. "Marcus, Vivienne," I said warmly, "thank you for joining us. I hope you're enjoying the evening." Marcus turned with obvious relief at hearing a familiar voice. "Isabella, this is incredible. I had no idea your operations had expanded to this scale." "We've been fortunate to find clients who value what we're building," I replied diplomatically. "The yacht is actually just our newest platform for delivering personalized experiences that can't be replicated through traditional service providers." Vivienne's expression was carefully neutral, but I could see her mentally calculating the cost of what surrounded us. The yacht alone represented an investment larger than Blackwell Hotel's annual profit, and that was before considering the operational infrastructure required to deliver the kind of seamless service our clients expected. Your guest list is quite impressive, she observed. I recognize several faces from international business publications. These are people who've become friends as much as clients, I explained. When you consistently deliver results that exceed expectations, business relationships naturally evolve into something more meaningful. The observation contained layers of meaning that weren't lost on either of them. Marcus's relationship with Vivienne had always been transactional, his charm and potential in exchange for her money and connections. What I'd built with our clients was based on genuine value creation and mutual respect. As if to illustrate the point, Catherine Montrose approached our group with her daughter and son-in-law in tow. Isabella, I've been bragging about your medical tourism capabilities to Sarah and David. They're planning an extended honeymoon that would include some specialized wellness consultations in Switzerland, and I thought you might be able to coordinate something extraordinary for them. The request was exactly the kind of complex, multifaceted challenge that Celestial Aviation Services had been designed to handle. Medical tourism coordination, luxury travel planning, privacy protection, and seamless international logistics, all wrapped into an experience that would exceed anything traditional service providers could offer. I'd be delighted to explore possibilities, I replied, already mentally outlining potential approaches. Why don't we schedule a consultation next week to discuss your specific interests and requirements? As Catherine's family continued describing their vision, I noticed Marcus and Vivienne listening with growing amazement. This wasn't just customer service. It was problem-solving at a level that required deep expertise, extensive resources, and the kind of attention to detail that transformed complex challenges into seamless experiences. After Catherine's group moved on to continue their evening, Marcus and Vivienne remained quiet for several moments, clearly processing what they'd witnessed. How do you do it? Marcus asked finally. Coordinate all these moving pieces across different countries and industries? The same way you build any successful business, I replied. You understand your clients' needs better than they understand them themselves. You invest in capabilities that deliver results, and you never compromise on quality or integrity. The words carried weight that went beyond business strategy. For 12 years, Marcus had watched me apply those same principles to supporting his ventures, managing our household, and maintaining relationships with people who could have been valuable business connections if he'd bothered to cultivate them properly. I remember you talking about starting a travel business, he said quietly. But I never imagined anything like this. Vision requires the freedom to pursue it, I replied, meeting his eyes directly. Some situations provide that freedom, and others constrain it. The implication was clear. Our marriage had been one of the constraints I'd needed to overcome to discover what I was capable of building. His departure had been liberation disguised as abandonment. Vivienne shifted uncomfortably, perhaps sensing the undercurrents in our conversation. Well, you've certainly built something impressive, she said, though I imagine the operational complexity must be overwhelming at times. Actually, it's the opposite, I replied with genuine enthusiasm. When you're building something aligned with your authentic strengths and values, complexity becomes energizing rather than overwhelming. Every challenge is an opportunity to create something better. Before either of them could respond, Elena appeared with news that the evening's entertainment was about to begin. We'd arranged for a private performance by a world-renowned pianist, whose music would provide the perfect backdrop for continued networking while showcasing another aspect of the unique experiences we could coordinate for clients. As guests gathered in the yacht's main salon for the performance, I excused myself to ensure everything was proceeding smoothly. But before leaving Marcus and Vivienne on the upper deck, I made one final observation. The invitation to tonight's event was extended because of our business relationship through Blackwell Hotels, I said. But I hope you'll consider it something more. A demonstration of what becomes possible when people are empowered to pursue their authentic potential, rather than conforming to others' limitations. As I walked away, I could feel their eyes following me, both of them undoubtedly trying to reconcile the woman they'd known with the person they were observing tonight. The struggling ex-wife had been replaced by someone who commanded respect from global leaders, who'd built something that exceeded their own achievements, and who radiated the kind of confidence that came from knowing her success was entirely self-created. The pianist's performance was extraordinary, but I found myself watching Marcus and Vivienne more than the entertainment. Throughout the evening, they'd been observing something they'd never seen before. Authentic success built on merit, rather than inheritance. Relationships based on mutual value creation rather than social positioning, and leadership that inspired rather than demanded respect. When the last guests departed via helicopter just after midnight, I stood alone on Celestial Horizon's deck, watching the lights of Monaco twinkle across the harbor. The evening had exceeded every expectation I'd held for this moment of revelation. Marcus's face when he'd fully absorbed the scope of what I'd built had indeed been priceless. Not just shock, but a dawning recognition of the magnitude of his miscalculation. He'd traded our shared future for immediate access to Vivienne's established wealth, never imagining that what he was walking away from had the potential to become something far more valuable than what he was pursuing. But the most satisfying aspect of the evening hadn't been his recognition of my success. It had been my own recognition that I no longer needed it. The woman who'd cried herself to sleep on an air mattress had built something so far beyond revenge that Marcus's opinion had become irrelevant to her sense of accomplishment. The validation I'd once craved from his acknowledgement had been replaced by something far more powerful. The deep satisfaction of knowing that every aspect of my success had been earned through my own vision, determination, and authentic value creation. As Celestial Horizon prepared to depart Monaco for our next Mediterranean destination, I realized that this chapter of my story was finally complete. Not because I'd proven something to Marcus or outcompeted Vivienne, but because I'd discovered who I was capable of becoming when freed from others' limitations and empowered to pursue my authentic potential. The future stretching ahead was filled with possibilities I'd never imagined during those dark days after the divorce. International expansion, new service categories, strategic partnerships that could reshape entire industries, all built on the foundation of relationships with extraordinary people who valued what I'd learned to create. Marcus had left me for a richer woman, but what he'd actually done was free me to become the richest woman in the room. 6 months after the Monaco revelation, I received a phone call that would close the final chapter of my old life in the most unexpected way possible. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was in my penthouse office overlooking Century City, reviewing acquisition proposals for 3 European luxury service companies that would expand Celestial's footprint into markets we'd been targeting for years. "Isabella, it's Marcus." His voice sounded strained, older somehow, carrying a weight I'd never heard before. "I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll hear me out." I set down the financial reports I'd been reviewing. In the months since Monaco, we'd had no contact beyond the occasional industry event where professional courtesy required brief acknowledgments. "What can I do for you, Marcus?" "Vivienne and we're getting divorced." The words came out in a rush, as if he'd been rehearsing them. "The business is failing, her family's cutting ties, and she's claiming I misrepresented my financial contributions to the relationship." The irony was almost too perfect. Vivienne was essentially doing to Marcus what he'd done to me, discarding him when he was no longer financially useful, rewriting their shared history to minimize his contributions, and using legal maneuvers to protect her assets while leaving him with minimal support. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it genuinely. Despite everything that had happened between us, I took no pleasure in his pain. "That's not why I'm calling, though." He paused, clearly struggling with whatever he needed to say next. "Isabella, I made the biggest mistake of my life when I left you. Not just personally, but professionally. I threw away a partnership with someone who was capable of building an empire, and I did it for someone who just wanted to buy a companion. The admission was more honest than anything he'd said during our 12 years of marriage. But it also revealed something troubling about his perspective. He was still thinking in transactional terms, still measuring relationships by their strategic value rather than their emotional authenticity. "What are you asking me, Marcus?" Another pause, longer this time. "I know this sounds insane, but I was wondering if there might be a place for me at Celestial Aviation. I have experience in hospitality management now, connections in the luxury, travel industry, and I understand the client base better than I did 5 years ago." The request was so audacious it took my breath away. He was essentially asking me to hire him after abandoning our marriage for financial advantage, then watching his chosen replacement fail spectacularly. It suggested a fundamental misunderstanding of both business ethics and personal boundaries that was almost breathtaking in its presumption. "Marcus," I said carefully, "I appreciate that you're going through a difficult time, but Celestial Aviation's hiring decisions are based on professional qualifications and cultural fit. Personal history aside, what you're describing doesn't align with our current staffing needs." "But you know my capabilities," he pressed. "You supported my entrepreneurial efforts for years. You saw my potential even when others didn't." The conversation was becoming uncomfortable in ways that went beyond personal awkwardness. Marcus was revealing a complete lack of understanding about what had made Celestial Aviation Services successful. He seemed to believe that familiarity with luxury lifestyle and social connections were qualifications, rather than basic prerequisites for operating in our market. "Marcus, the people I hire have track records of building something significant, usually overcoming substantial obstacles in the process. They've demonstrated the kind of resilience, creativity, and ethical standards that our clients expect from everyone on our team." What I didn't say, but what hung in the air between us, was that his track record showed exactly the opposite. A pattern of abandoning commitments when better opportunities appeared, of choosing short-term advantage over long-term relationship building, and of lacking the persistence required to see difficult projects through to completion. "I understand," he said finally, though his tone suggested he didn't really. "I just thought, given our history and what you've accomplished, maybe there might be an opportunity for me to be part of something meaningful again." The conversation ended politely but definitively, with me wishing him well in his future endeavors and suggesting he might find opportunities with companies that valued his specific background in luxury hospitality. After hanging up, I sat in my office for several minutes, processing not just what he'd said, but what the entire interaction revealed about how differently we'd each interpreted our shared history. Marcus still saw our marriage as a business partnership, where I'd been the supportive investor in his potential. He couldn't understand that what had made Celestial Aviation successful wasn't just market knowledge or social connections, but the deep personal transformation that had come from rebuilding my life from nothing, learning to trust my own judgment, and developing the kind of authentic confidence that attracted extraordinary people. The divorce hadn't just ended our marriage, it had freed me to discover capabilities I'd never known I possessed. Every client relationship I'd built, every operational challenge I'd overcome, every strategic decision I'd made had contributed to developing judgment and expertise that couldn't be acquired through casual exposure to luxury lifestyle. Later, that week, Elena brought me news that provided an interesting postscript to Marcus's phone call. Blackwell Hotels had officially filed for bankruptcy, with Vivienne's family's legal team working to protect their personal assets while allowing the business to collapse. Marcus, as a minority stakeholder, would receive nothing from the liquidation and faced potential personal liability for business debts he'd personally guaranteed. "There's more," Elena added, clearly relishing the dramatic irony. Vivienne's already been photographed at several social events with a new companion, a 30-year-old private equity executive whose firm specializes in distressed hospitality acquisitions. The pattern was so predictable it would have been funny if it weren't so sad. Vivienne had replaced Marcus with someone who could help her recover from the business failure, just as she'd originally chosen Marcus to help expand her empire. She approached relationships as strategic alliances, discarding partners when they were no longer useful for achieving her objectives. "How do you feel about all this?" Elena asked, studying my expression. "Relieved," I said, realizing it was completely true. This closes a chapter that's been lingering in the background for years. Marcus's call and Vivienne's pattern both confirm that I made the right choices about who to trust and how to build something sustainable. What I'd learned from watching their relationship implode was that success built on strategic positioning, rather than genuine value creation, was inherently unstable. Marcus had attached himself to Vivienne's wealth, and she'd used his charm to expand her social influence, but neither of them had contributed anything lasting to the partnership. When external circumstances changed, they had nothing substantial to fall back on. Celestial Aviation Services, by contrast, had been built on authentic relationships with clients who valued what we could deliver, partnerships with team members who shared our commitment to excellence and operational capabilities that created genuine value in the marketplace. External challenges had made us stronger rather than exposing fundamental weaknesses. 3 months later, I received validation of that philosophy from an unexpected source. The International Luxury Service Association invited me to deliver the keynote address at their annual convention, focusing on sustainable excellence in ultra-high-net-worth client services. The audience would include luxury service providers from around the world, all seeking insights into how Celestial Aviation had achieved such rapid growth while maintaining the kind of client satisfaction ratings that were typically impossible to sustain at scale. My speech centered on a principle I'd discovered through painful personal experience. Authentic success required building value rather than positioning for advantage, creating relationships rather than exploiting connections, and developing capabilities rather than relying on inherited advantages. The luxury service industry has traditionally been dominated by companies that inherit market position through family wealth, social connections, or historical brand recognition, I told the assembled executives. But the clients we serve today are increasingly sophisticated in distinguishing between inherited advantages and earned expertise. I outlined how Celestial Aviation's approach differed from traditional luxury service models. Instead of trading on social positioning or inherited credibility, we'd built our reputation by consistently delivering results that exceeded client expectations. Instead of maintaining arm's-length transactional relationships, we'd developed deep understanding of individual client needs that allowed us to anticipate requirements before they were articulated. Our most successful client relationships have evolved far beyond service provider and customer, I explained. They've become partnerships where we're trusted advisors helping extraordinary people achieve objectives that seemed impossible when they first contacted us. The response was immediate and enthusiastic, with dozens of industry leaders approaching me afterward to discuss potential collaborations, joint ventures, and strategic partnerships. But the most meaningful conversation came from an unexpected source, Dr. Sarah Chen, who'd flown in specifically to hear my speech. "Isabella," she said as we found a quiet corner during the networking reception, "I wanted to thank you for something that goes beyond business." "What's that?" "5 years ago, when you first started coordinating my travel, you were clearly going through something difficult personally. You never let it affect your professionalism, but I could see you were rebuilding your life from some kind of major disruption." I nodded, remembering those early days when every client interaction had felt like a test of whether I could maintain my composure while everything else was falling apart. Watching you transform that personal challenge into the motivation to build something extraordinary has been inspiring in ways that affected my own approach to overcoming obstacles. When I faced my own professional setbacks, the research funding that was cut, the clinical trial that failed, the colleagues who doubted my methods, I remembered your example of using adversity as fuel for creation rather than allowing it to become an excuse for limitation. Her observation touched something deep in my understanding of what the past 5 years had really been about. I'd thought I was building a business to prove something to Marcus, to compete with Vivienne, to validate my own capabilities after being dismissed and abandoned. But what I'd actually been doing was something much more significant, demonstrating that transformative success was possible for anyone willing to use their most difficult experiences as raw material for creating something meaningful. The divorce hadn't been something to overcome. It had been the catalyst that forced me to discover who I was capable of becoming when freed from others' limitations. That evening, I called my parents from my hotel suite overlooking the convention center, where I'd just delivered a speech to luxury service industry leaders from 43 countries. My father, now recovered from his knee surgery and living comfortably in the guest wing of my Beverly Hills estate, answered on the first ring. "Mija, how did the speech go?" "Better than I imagined, Papa." The response was incredible. "I think we're going to have partnership opportunities that could expand Celestial into markets I'd never even considered." "I'm proud of you," he said simply, "but not just for the business success, for the woman you've become. Your mother always said you had the strength to build something extraordinary if you ever got the chance to try." The reference to my mother, who'd passed away 2 years before my divorce, brought tears to my eyes. She'd never seen Celestial Aviation Services, never witnessed my transformation from struggling wife to successful entrepreneur, never had the chance to say, "I told you so," about my hidden potential. But in a way, she had seen it. Every principle that had guided Celestial's development, treating people with genuine respect regardless of their status, creating value through authentic service rather than social positioning, building relationships based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation, had been lessons she'd taught me through her own example. "I wish she could see what you've built," my father continued. "She always believed you were capable of more than you knew." After ending the call, I stood at my hotel window watching the city lights below and thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 5 years earlier, I'd been a broken woman crying on an air mattress, wondering how I'd rebuild my life after being discarded for someone with more money and better connections. Tonight, I was the CEO of a company that had redefined luxury service standards, the keynote speaker at international industry conferences, and someone whose personal story had become inspiration for other people facing their own seemingly impossible challenges. The transformation hadn't been easy, and it hadn't been quick. Every client relationship had required proving myself. Every operational challenge had demanded creative solutions I'd never attempted before. Every expansion opportunity had involved calculated risks that could have destroyed everything I'd worked to build. But the woman who'd emerged from that process was someone I'd never known existed during my marriage to Marcus. She was confident without being arrogant, successful without being entitled, and powerful without needing to diminish others to maintain her position. Marcus's recent phone call had been the final confirmation that this transformation was complete. His request for employment had revealed that he still saw relationships in transactional terms, still believed that familiarity could substitute for qualification, and still didn't understand the difference between inherited advantage and earned expertise. More importantly, my response to his request had shown that I no longer needed his validation, his recognition, or his presence in my life to feel complete. The woman who'd once measured her worth through his approval now had her own standards for success, her own vision for the future, and her own sense of what constituted meaningful achievement. 6 months later, I received the news that provided perfect closure to this chapter of my life. Marcus had taken a position as general manager of a mid-tier resort in Costa Rica, a significant step down from his previous ambitions, but apparently, the best opportunity available to someone with his particular combination of experience and reputation in the industry. Vivienne, meanwhile, had married her private equity executive in a ceremony that was covered extensively in society publications. The articles emphasized her resilience in rebuilding after business setbacks, her ability to attract successful partners, and her family's continued influence in luxury hospitality circles. I felt neither satisfaction nor resentment reading about their new circumstances. Their stories had diverged so completely from mine that they felt like characters from a novel I'd read years earlier, rather than people who'd once been central to my daily experience. The final validation came during Celestial Aviation's 5th anniversary celebration, a black-tie gala we hosted at the Beverly Hills estate that had once been a symbol of triumph over Marcus's abandonment, but had evolved into something much more meaningful. The headquarters for a company that was transforming how ultra-high-net-worth individuals thought about luxury service. Our guest list included heads of state, pharmaceutical executives, entertainment industry leaders, tech billionaires, and foreign diplomats whose combined influence shaped global policy in ways most people never realized. But more importantly, it included the Celestial Aviation team, pilots, concierges, operations coordinators, and strategic planners who joined our mission to create experiences that exceeded anything traditional service providers could imagine. During my remarks to the assembled guests, I shared the story of Celestial Aviation's founding without mentioning Marcus by name or dwelling on the personal circumstances that had provided the initial motivation. 5 years ago, Celestial Aviation Services began with a simple observation. Ultra-high-net-worth individuals weren't lacking access to luxury amenities. They were lacking access to service providers who understood their world intimately enough to anticipate needs before they were articulated. I outlined how that observation had led to our focus on authentic relationship building, operational excellence, and continuous innovation in service delivery. But the heart of my message was about transformation, how companies, like individuals, could use challenging circumstances as catalysts for discovering capabilities they'd never known they possessed. Every setback we've faced, every operational challenge we've overcome, every client relationship we've built has contributed to developing capabilities that didn't exist when we started. The company that exists today couldn't have been created 5 years ago because we hadn't yet learned what we needed to know, developed what we needed to develop, or become who we needed to become. The speech was met with sustained applause, but the most meaningful response came afterward from Elena, who'd been with me since the beginning and had witnessed every aspect of the transformation. "You know what's remarkable about tonight?" she said as we watched guests departing via helicopter from the estate's private landing pad. "5 years ago, you were building this company to prove something to people who'd underestimated you. Tonight, you're leading an organization that's proving things to yourself, that you can create sustainable value, build meaningful relationships, and use your success to help other people achieve their own impossible objectives." Her observation crystallized something I'd been feeling but hadn't articulated. The motivation that had driven Celestial Aviation's founding, the need to prove Marcus wrong, to compete with Vivienne's wealth, to validate my capabilities after being dismissed, had been transformed into something much more sustainable and meaningful. I was no longer building something to impress people from my past. I was building something that reflected my authentic values, utilized my genuine strengths, and created opportunities for extraordinary people to achieve objectives that mattered to them. The woman Marcus had left for a richer woman had indeed become the richest woman in the room, but more importantly, she'd become the woman she was always capable of being once she was freed from others' limitations and empowered to pursue her authentic potential. Standing on my estate's terrace as the last helicopter disappeared into the Los Angeles night sky, I realized that revenge had been just the beginning of this story. The real triumph wasn't proving Marcus wrong about my potential. It was discovering that his opinion had never mattered as much as my own belief in what was possible. The future stretching ahead was filled with opportunities I couldn't have imagined during those dark days after the divorce. International expansion, new service categories, strategic partnerships that could reshape entire industries, all built on the foundation of authentic relationships with extraordinary people who valued what I'd learned to create. His face, when he'd seen my private jet, had indeed been priceless. But my face when I'd realized I no longer needed his recognition to feel complete, that was the transformation that had made everything else possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.